time. We have you guys muted on this end throughout this webinar. We will be hoping you guys will do some discussion with us, and so if you need to unmute yourself, just push *7, and then to remute, push *6. So as we go through this, so as we get to that, we'll remind you, but we do have you all muted right now, and then if you'd like to make a comment verbally, please push *7. Always available is the comment box. We definitely will be keeping an eye out for that and trying to use some of that for interaction as well. All right, well, why don't we get started? My name is Michael Cox. I am the Youth Engagement and Cultural Competence Specialist here at the Texas Institute for Excellence in Mental Health under the Texas System of Care project. And I will be one of your presenters today. Here joining me is David McClung, and I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Hi, my name is David McClung. I'm currently a graduate student at Baylor University, where I'm working on a Master of Divinity, a Master of Social Work, and I'm a social work intern here at Texas System of Care.
Cool. So I just saw someone from Houston. If we want to make a comment, we must call in. You can either call in or you can just go ahead and type it into the comment box there, and I'll or David will read it off and respond that way as well. So we can do it either way. But we will have a couple of times where we really hope you guys will engage with us and talk and respond, and so we'll hit that as well. All right, so today we are going to be talking about how to authentically engage young people, and I hope that this process is a little bit more introspective than it is a list of all the how-tos and how-not-tos. But we hope to give you some great information and discover some things together as we walk through this process together. Like I said, there will be multiple opportunities for feedback. Anytime that you have a question, we've got multiple eyes looking on the chat box, and so feel free to put those in there or unmute. I do have a tendency to talk fast, and so if I get too fast for you, please make that note in the box, and I will slow down, or one of my colleagues can throw something at me, and we'll make sure that I slow down that way. So just real quickly, we're going to give a little roadmap of where we are, what we're going to do today, and kind of how things are going to work. First, we're just going to look at the framework, kind of what maybe we've adopted here as our definition for authentic youth engagement, kind of give you a little bit of a framework for that, and just talk that obviously it's not an exhaustive definition, but kind of what the framework that we work from here at the Institute when it comes to engaging young people. We're going to look at the why. Why engage young people? Why is it important? Why is it necessary? Why is it necessary for you there specifically in your sites and your locations, and how that's going to happen? Then some things to consider, things that I have maybe learned over the years of working, the things that I've done in the system, and then some strategies and tips, recommendations we may have, and then just some more time for dialogue. Before we do that, before we get any further, let's do a quick roll call, find out who is on the line. If you would tell us what city and group you represent and where you are located. This will definitely help Carol with some roll call, but also just to help us know who's where. So if you're not able to look to verbally let us know that you're here, go ahead and do so by typing it in. But go for it. Who's on the line with us? Remember to unmute, you hit *7. Jeff Carr from Lubbock, I see you.
Clear Creek.
Hello, Clear Creek.
This is Carol. I think most of them have checked in, so I just wanted to get a feel for where everybody was and kind of give you that same feel.
Wonderful. Thanks, Carol. Hey, Clear Creek, I have a very dear friend down there named Audrey Tidwell. If you know her, she's an awesome lady. Mentor, her husband was a mentor of mine. So thank you guys for checking in. So that's our roadmap. We will some strategies, some tips, recommendations, some dialogue, those kind of things. And as I said, please feel free throughout this talk to either raise a question on the chat box or to chime in as we get moving through things to say. So we are with our very first poll question, some things I want you guys to respond to, please. The first one is, has your organization conducted a readiness assessment for engaging youth within your system? It'll be a yes or no response. And then the second question is, did your organization have a plan for youth and adult partnerships prior to funding? I actually can't see see the results of the poll. There we go. Everybody's online. Do you have access to that? There we go. Here we go. So the first one, even those of you guys that are aren't on the computer, I'll let you know what everybody's responding. The first one is, has your organization conducted a readiness assessment for engaging youth within its system? Then the second one is, did your organization have a plan for youth and adult partnership prior to funding? All right. Looking pretty good, like most of them saying yes. So this ought to be some really rich discussion. I'm interested to hear some of those plans and how those plans are working out and where you guys are. All right. Well, good. Looks like everybody at least had a plan, and hopefully those plans are working out. And if not, you're working on some things to work through those. So we ended up with about 67% on the first one, about 80% on the other one. And so I guess seeing that they were youth adult councils, that kind of make a good idea of make sure they're ready to go. All right, so moving on. This is kind of the working definition that we work from, is a shared understanding of purpose, involvement, and vision on the behalf of young people or persons and adults. Shared input in decision-making, policy development, service provisions, and cultural development. And so a lot of that is where identifying your roles as the young person, identify the roles of the adult. How do they work together? How do you work together to improve the system, improve outcomes, the work that you're doing? How do you do those? We'll talk a lot today kind of what those roles look like as the young people, talk about what the roles look like for the adults, and how do you bring those two together and work towards the same outcome as those things are specifically implemented. All right, David, I'm gonna give you some why. Give you some whys.
So one of the things that we talk about quite a bit is clarifying your why, or knowing your why. And what that basically means is, okay, so you have the funding, you have a plan for engaging youth, you have some ideas of what that could look like, you know you want to do it, but why do you want to do it is always one of the important questions that we go back to. And so one of the things that we find with that why then is there's lots of value to it, both for the adult, for the professional, for those agencies, as well as for youth. And so a few things that includes, for example, for adults include increased relevancy and ability to really connect. When we think engagement, one of the things we often talk about are relationships. And so how do you form those relationships in a way that connects with the youth and is really authentic at the same time? So if you're going along and your approach is, let us use the language that they're using only, and let us act as if we're them. Well, that's not authentic. That's not who you are as a person. And so we talk a lot about how do you make that relationship in a way that's authentic to who you are, where who you are as an agency, who you are as a professional meets them with who they are as a youth. So increased relevancy, but also in a way that's culturally appropriate and effective at the same time. Producing a positive outcome for programming. Suddenly what we find is that youth have ideas, they have things from their experience and from their life and from their stories and that they're able to use, and that experience is able to help drive some of that decision making. And so what that leads to is a shared decision making for positive outcomes in programming. It's educational. We find new things that maybe we didn't know before. And most of all then, because it's educational, sometimes it may be humbling for us to be able to step back and say, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Ultimately, it comes from that sort of continued learning perspective where we have the opportunity to continue learning, we have the opportunity to continue engaging in those processes, and our learning isn't done. As I'm sure you have probably seen, youth culture is always changing, for one, and who youth are is always different by each individual. So the more we engage, the more we form those relationships, we find that those relationships are different, and we are able to learn more knowledge as a result. For the youth, one, it helps development. One of the things we commonly find is that when we engage youth, not only are we learning something, but they're able to learn something as well. And we can, sometimes I think it gets looked at of, oh, well, those skills are nice to have if you want to do advocacy, or, oh, those skills are nice to have if you want to do policy. But we're talking life skills, where those skills can really be applied across numerous sectors and numerous capacities as well. And so being able to gain a sense of competence and just have that feeling of, you know what, I made a difference, or you know what, I learned something today and I can apply that differently as a result. And as a result, when that happens, when we form those relationships, there's a decrease in risk factors and an increase in protective factors, because suddenly what we're finding is not, those youth don't feel like they have to do it on their own, because sometimes life can be hard. But suddenly we find that those relationships help to provide some support, and we're connecting them, and they're being connected sometimes through their own initiative as well, to additional resources, additional people, additional agencies. And as a result, there's sort of that type of wraparound almost approach that begins to develop. And so finally, with that then, not only is there a decrease, but there's an increase in leadership and ability to communicate, ability to use these skills that, again, aren't necessarily contained to something like policy or research, but are able to be applied across these numerous sectors and numerous capacities. So that's just some of the why. And again, this is just a small list, and these are things that as an agency and as individuals are important to really go back to and say, but what is my why? What is it that brings me to the table? Why am I doing this? And when you discover those things together, then you have that kind of shared realm where you may come from different capacities, you may come from different backgrounds and different ages and different cultures, and that's okay. But the question is, how do you share that, and how do you bring that together to find those common whys, as well as what it is that brings you to that table for your own personal why. And so I'm going to go on and turn this over to Michael at this point for some discussion on that.
So it seemed that people were having phone problems. Is that everybody?
I can hear it fine.
Okay. All right. So if we continue to do that, just keep typing in. Glenn will kind of help troubleshoot it for us. But if you are having problems, just go ahead and hang up and try to call back in and see what's happening on that end. All right. So yeah, I definitely agree with David. So we're thinking through the purpose, why we want it there. I think it's obviously a great idea, but having a plan to do that. But looking at that, he alluded to it a little bit about looking at the difference between youth and adults. One of the conversations I constantly have is that I am 39 years old. I work with teenagers consistently and have for 20 years, and make it very clear that I am not a youth, and I don't necessarily speak on behalf of the youth. I work with young people, and so looking at the benefits, why are we doing it, why is it part of that? There's uniqueness in the adult, the purpose of the adult, and then that of the youth and the life stages that they're in. How do we bring those two together so that there's great outcomes for both? There's great outcomes for the organization and the community as a whole. And so constantly coming back to that why are we doing this? Why are young people at the table? Why is it necessary for young people to be at the table? And then the vice versa. Why is it necessary for adults to be at the table? To be working together to improve the lives of young people. I recognize through this process, a lot of this we might be speaking to the choir. You guys are definitely on the front lines working with young people on a day-to-day basis, but recognizing that constant reminder back to systems, back to the greater systems of why it's important for young people to be involved and how that we help improve their well-being as well as that of the agency. So our question, and this is where we're going to open it up for some discussion, and for those of you who don't know, I am a therapist, so I'm okay with silence. If you don't speak, we'll sit here for a little while, just messing with you. So we have a discussion question here that we really would love to hear back from you. Carol tells us that the sites need to know they need to have their why, sorry. So the discussion question is how would you, in your role, benefit from active and authentic youth and adult partnerships? So in the roles that you guys play as the Yak leaderships within your communities, how would you benefit in your role, and how would it be a benefit of that being a synchronized, harmonious relationship of young people and adults? The lines are open. You have to remember to push *7 to unmute and give us some feedback of why it would benefit you in your role.
This is Carol, and I don't have a Yak, but the reason I put them in there is I do feel like it will be easier in some ways for the community to make a program work when they have the youth right there at the table.
Okay. Thank you, Carol.
Hi, this is Shannon from Tyler. And I think that we all benefit from this process because you get different perspectives. You get an idea of how our youth think and our adults from different communities, and how you can bring it together to to benefit the community.
Okay. Thanks, Jenna. Make sure, guys, that you, when you turn your speaker on, to make sure your speakers on your computer are muted so we don't get feedback. Thank you, Shannon. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So it's funny how within our communities or systems, we have adults that live in the community, we have youth that live in the community, children. The fact that we all should be able to work together is definitely great. And Dolores mentioned on the line, chat line, said it's always very motivating to see what youth have to offer. I think it's also motivating that there's times that we, in that process of helping them figure out what they have to offer. I think sometimes we have the assumption that we bring a young person that fits an age bracket and think they automatically know what to do and what to say when they're sitting in a committee or sitting at the table. And so part of that process is helping them develop that, helping them discover what they have to bring and what they have to do in that process. And so that's another, to me, another exciting point. Somebody else? Multiple attendees typing. Clear Creek, partnerships indicate relationships which is beneficial for both youth and adults. Yes. There's also been an encouragement to watch those relationships form during the process. Yeah. So obviously being able to come from two different perspectives, maybe as an adult with that world and then that of the young person and what they're currently going through. You know, we oftentimes use the term that call young people the experts of their lives. And so they can bring their current perspective, what they're going through, have been through to that point, and bring that to the table. So helping them understand the importance of that and how that plays a role within that system is really big. And so, you know, when we opened up, we talked about David hit the why of why bringing young people aboard. And so why are they there? If they don't know that, it's our role to help them discover that. And then to see the relevance to how it affects our community, how it affects the young people, their peers, as well as the agency or organization in which that you may serve and work with. And so keeping that perspective and letting them know that is wonderful. Yep, that's true, Carol. It's maybe the first time that the youth have been called an expert. Yeah. Give them a little boost of confidence. All right, well, we're going to keep it going, keep the conversation going, and please keep those coming through there, and we'll pull a few of those out as we go through it. Omar, hey Omar, says youth are trendsetters and are more truthful regarding their opinion. This is true. Sometimes we ask for an opinion and we're going to get it, and so be prepared for that. You ask, you shall receive, definitely. I sent you guys, through Carol, a list of questions to consider, some things to begin thinking through and within your own workings with young people within your community. And we're going to walk through those just a little bit and definitely want you guys to respond with maybe some of the things you discovered or maybe some things that it prodded for you. But we're going to expand on them a little bit and kind of the purpose behind those questions. And so let's walk through those a little bit and see some things that I have just, again, have noticed out there in my own work or just working with young people in general or through our different works have come up with these questions. Jeff, I'm sorry, you said seeing youth and adults interact offers an opportunity to see where the conflict is, and then I often find more valued information in the conflict as opposed to the agreement. Yeah, I like it. So the first question is why you want to engage young people in your organization. You know, it may be the obvious, I think, because they're youth adult councils, right? And so that means young people should be a part and so should adults. But going back to that why, and that constant, why are we here? Why is this relationship necessary? What's the point? And so being able to understand that and have that identified, maybe not just as you as an organization, but you have maybe a purpose as an organization, but does that match the purpose of the young people being at the table? And the young people being a part of that. And so if those are conflicting, it's okay. I agree with Jeff and his comment. It's okay to have that conflict, but how do we come together to make sure we have a common purpose and working towards that common purpose and respecting one another to a point that our opinions, our experiences and our expertise, is that a word? Expertise, that our expertise contribute to the overall goal. Then the second one is how will engaging youth improve overall health and well-being of their peers? So looking at that, is it simply because we, again, meet the deliverables, or is it because there is an output that is going to affect the young people that are involved, as well as the peers that affect the peers, but also affect those the peers that they're around, that they're constantly having an effect on. And David, feel free to jump in at any point on any of those. And then the third one is what current attempts to engage youth are being made, and then what has been done historically. So knowing that you received money from the states to implement something, are there efforts going on in the community that are already engaging young people, that are being effective engaging young people, being aware of those and knowing what those are, seeing some partnerships? We were recently in Houston doing some work down there with a group, and been able to see some of the networking of young people that's going on down there was pretty amazing. And seeing how you have groups that are engaging on people, but also relying on the expertise of folks who have already done it, who are doing it well, and making sure that they partner and finding out where the gaps are and where the holes are. So really just sitting back and find out what has been done, and is it continuing, is it effective, and how do we partner in continuing in the work and making sure that we are affecting a community of young people specifically. Maybe like 3?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to what Michael's saying there, I mean, I think the important thing too is, again, how can we collaborate with other people on what those projects are, and what are ways that we can work those together? Because again, if we're doing it separate, that's okay in some cases, but ultimately it's a matter of how do we do this in a holistic effort in a way that really is community-based as a whole, so that we're able to bring those supports together. And maybe there's challenges to that. But I guess the question I'd like to ask then is, again, what are you celebrating, or what is there that you can celebrate where you are now in your area of youth engagement? And that may be something big. It may be, again, starting a group and seeing, being able to have youth at the table who want to be there, and you're excited to have them. That's great. But it may be something small too, which is just an effort. And the fact that you want to make that effort in itself is sort of trend-setting in itself, dare I say, just because, again, systems aren't always there. And so by being able to have that desire to do so, it can be a step in the right direction as well, and something to also celebrate. But at the same time, again, we recognize that maybe there's barriers in being able to engage youth as well. And so whether that be trying to find the right time, whether that be trying to work around agency policies or system policies, whether that be trying to find, even though you may have funding, trying to find how do we budget this out in a way that you can still help make some of those decisions in that process and help determine what it is that that budget goes towards. And again, knowing that why helps you determine that question, how will you know you've been successful? If you don't know that why, it's really kind of hard to answer what it is that makes you successful in what you're doing, because it's that why that brings you to the table. So if your why is because you want to see your community really connect across agencies and across systems, connect with youth in a way that's meaningful, where they're involved in their treatment, they're involved in the options that they have, they're involved in leading decisions across agencies and again across systems, then that why, because that's why you're there, helps to determine you're successful. And when you reach that point, or when you're doing those things that help you to be able to do that, when you're able to start engaging those youth. But again, that why is just always so important, because it goes back to those goals ultimately, and it really goes back to the outcomes as a result.
Cool. So let's hear from you guys. If there were any of these questions that either stood out to you, I'm specifically interested in the last 3. What are some things that you're currently doing that you can celebrate? We'd love to hear about those. If you're experiencing some barriers in engaging young people, maybe what some of those barriers are, maybe we can address some of those. And then, obviously, have you identified your why, and how do you know if you're being successful? So lines are open. Remember, *7 if you want to make a comment, or you can type it into the chat box. But any of those that stood out, or on our end specifically, questions 4 through 6. All right, so Clear Creek and San Antonio, Carol's calling you out. So you have to talk.
Hello.
Hello.
We've had a couple of things just in the last week that were really exciting. Last week we did a theme week for the kids that we're working with called Love Above, and it was based around love above apathy and hate and violence and drugs and alcohol. And so we got to see a little bit more of the kids and what they produced. They chose one of the days to engage the theme. And so they introduced it to their whole student body. Their idea was for everybody in the school to write Valentines to each other, which meant more than 1,000 Valentines had to be written by the end of the week. But it was just amazing to watch how they went about it. They created a video to engage their own student body and getting involved in what was going on the campus through the Search Institute survey. And then they did a presentation on Monday to get everyone on board with making the Valentines. And then through the days, they came in every day to write Valentines for their peers, for the ones that weren't getting some, or just to make sure that everybody was being encouraged through that. And then today, we also had kids start to interview some of the adults for our Yak group. And so they got to go through the process, learn some of the skills of interviewing, but also to engage with these adults that we have that are coming on board, and they are a part of the decision-making process about whether or not they are going to be involved.
Okay. I'm sorry, who was that was speaking?
That was Robin from Clear Creek.
Okay, thanks, Robin. So, Robin, can I ask, so was that the Love Above, was that a isolated event, or is it kind of a part of an overall plan for the group?
It was something that our students wanted to do in order to try to reach out to their peers. So it was a student-based, student-created thing, but I think they want to do it again next year. I don't know about again this year. It was a pretty major event.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a lot of Valentines to get done. See, Houston, Carla, you mentioned that school administration has been a barrier in Longview, and I don't know if you can expound on that. Is there a barrier in them allowing young people to be a part, to actually do something? If you could expound on that, that'd be really great to hear, kind of how they've been a barrier.
Yeah, it's basically allowing me like just to come in to present the Yak to the students. They're more test-based, test-focused, and don't have any interest of youth getting involved in such an activity as this. So they're just pushing it away, like brushing it off. Like we have other things to focus on besides like youth becoming involved in the community.
Okay. So, John, get in and do a presentation about who you are and what you're doing.
Mhm.
Okay. So this is where I would say, like, get stealth about it. That's my weird term, but help taking your young people and figuring out, all right, if you've got some already planted in the school, the beauty of young people is that if they are enjoying it and they really believe in the work that's happening, they're going to spread the word, and they're going to be a part of it. So it's almost making the administration hear from you because they're seeing something happen and it's positive, and they end up coming to you because it's like, man, our young people are doing something, we want to know what it is. So maybe the other approach may be, instead of having go to administration, young people that you may already have involved, to have them be the infiltrators.
Gotcha.
Do you have any young people that are currently involved? That go
Yeah, I actually have a meeting on tomorrow with some young people who are involved, and I was able to meet with a teacher this past weekend who was a high school teacher at the Longview High School. So she was like, she's trying to get some things installed in the school, and they're giving her a hard time. She's like, if we could just work together and just keep pushing it forward, maybe they'll give in.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, to me, that's one of the joys of working with young people is us as adults, we get really stringent and set on our agenda sometimes, and once we get them fired up and let them get fired up at what they're doing, what they're creating, what they're establishing, they're going to talk to their peers about it, and they're going to reach out and get other folks involved. And so definitely doing that. And then having a teacher on the inside is also definitely, I think, a benefit. All right, some from the chat box. Is that somebody else popping on? From Seasons of Change, it says, we successfully implemented Yak TV, a format where we introduce speakers similar to a newscast to share the theory of change and recruit Yak members. We were able to reach 40% of required MRUs during our information session and it held last Wednesday. Nice. Was that a theory of change model, so kind of like a logic model, how we're going to shift over change over time, is what I'm hearing from the Seasons of Change? Did you know, Carol? Okay. So I'm thinking that's the same thing, a theory of change and what that looked like. And then Dolores, we are hopefully going to have a website with numerous activities for youth to engage in to explore youth violence. Youth have been as much a part as adults in generating ideas and issues to address. Nice. Carol responded, I think they're referring to the theory of change. Okay. So Dolores, and looking at that and look at the activities that are out there and getting young people involved, are the young people involved in seeking what resources are available and so if you're trying to reduce the violence, are they part of the creating and seeking solutions? And do they know what solutions are out there? Thanks, Seasons of Change. Sasha writes, the school administration has been really excited about what we are trying to start, but I think that is mainly because CIS has had a really strong role and connection within those schools. School administration has been helping to identify and promote the Yak to their students. Okay. So yeah, I guess it's one of the things you depended on which community you're in and what level, what relationships you may have with administration. And, and I think this is something that's a good place to put this point is, as you begin to develop those is each group is going to be unique in the issues that you address. I know that you had individual risk factors that you had to begin to address. But realizing that, depending on the talents and abilities of the young people and the adults that are in that process, how we're going to do that and what activities do we propose, those kind of things, and where young people are and how do we get them involved. All of that has to be taken into consideration when you're looking at your individual communities. As youth are involved in selecting the issues, and we will have activities where youth will hunt for helpful resources depending on different forms of violence. Good, and looking at what things are available and helpful to that community. Carol mentions if you don't have a school as your champion, you may need to look elsewhere where you gather. Yeah, so knowing who your champions are in the community are huge, and who supports the work of young people is a big deal. All right, so we're going to move forward a little bit. Going on to some things to consider. And so this is kind of looking more at the structure. When you talk about the structure of your youth adult councils, when you're working with young people, kind of what are the things to keep in mind and keep in consideration as you're working together. So one is those power dynamics that are typical of youth and adults. And so it's that weird battle. If any of you are parents or have worked with young people in the past, realizing, okay, hey, how much freedom do we allow? Who does what? And oftentimes having the mentality that because we're the adults, we're the decision makers. And so in this setting, in this context, realizing that, it's kind of a shared power. You're both working on ideas, and I've seen that in what you've listed. It's a team approach, partner approach, bringing to the table the expertise from both ends. And so young people, where they are and what they're experiencing, brings a certain aspect to the table that many of us in our stage of life as adults probably have either forgotten about or weren't necessarily in contact with. And so they bring that unique perspective. And so what their peers are dealing with, what they're going through at this moment, and what is happening with amongst their peers, they bring that expertise to the table, which is extremely valuable. Because on the opposite end, as adults or agencies, we're seeing statistics, we're seeing information and data and this overrepresentation here, those kind of things, and we want to address that, but sometimes it's not very relevant. It's very difficult to know if the information we want to put out there or the resources we make available, are they relevant to the young people and where they are and to the needs that they have and they present. And so making sure that that relationship is definitely mutually beneficial to those that are involved. and looking at what makes the relationship, the partnership successful, the communication back and forth, and figuring out how to communicate. Again, talking to the choir, you guys know that there are oftentimes a phone call, an email doesn't work. It's usually a text message or getting on some sort of social media connection to be able to communicate with young people. That's just where they are. That's their world right now. And so being able to make sure that we're on top of how to communicate, what's going to be effective in communicating, and how are we going to communicate our messages. And that, again, that's where the beauty of the young people come in, is because they're the ones to give us that feedback and to know, hey, you know what, Facebook's not going to work because none of us are on Facebook. All right, great. So how do we do that? And we talked about teamwork. And then the big one for us, though, is it's kind of a quick overview of how we are trying to do a framework of things here at the state level with our youth engagement, is mentorship and coaching. And so recognizing that depending on your system, sometimes it's difficult to be able to get young people or have access to young people, to youth specifically. So thinking about kind of a mentoring or coaching approach where you may have older young adults that who have had experience with systems or just have had a little bit more experience in life, and helping them identify their strengths and their abilities, and how do they pass that on to young people behind them. Sometimes I'm a little far removed at 39, and so utilizing young people who are in their 20s that have had a little bit more lived experience to be the coach and mentors to young people that are coming behind them, and helping walk through that process and developing those leaders in the youth is extremely important. Sorry, I just saw a question. Power dynamics, please address quickly with possibilities to overcome barriers. Marshall, can you expound on that a little bit for us? Not on the phone. All right. So are you asking us to please address quickly with possible to overcome the barriers, the power dynamics? All right. So one of the big ones of those is having, in my opinion and experience, is the immediate is young people. When you come to the table and you go seek out young people, David mentioned earlier the why. If it's just because, as Carol also mentioned in our comments earlier, if it's just because there is a requirement within our grant or within our initiative that we have young people at the table, there's nothing authentic about that. There's nothing genuine about that. And so the young people can see right through that. If there's a person that's trying to reach out to them or to help engage them in this process, and then all they're doing it, they're not able to relate to them or aren't relevant to where they are, they're going to see through that. So when we get together with young people, we really do sit at the table and just say, why should we be here? Why is it important that we engage one another? Why is it important to address the issues that are out there? And then probably more important than all of those is, what are the issues that your young people, your peers are dealing with, and how can you be a part of finding that solution? So it's allowing them and establishing a place where we really do see them as those experts, as I mentioned earlier, the experts of their age, their youth culture, the community in which they identify, and so helping them be a part of that, and them being the think agents and the initiators in that process really does help establish a mutual beneficial relationship, so that it's not the adult said we do this, they mentioned what they create, what's happening. I think it's the lady from I think it was San Antonio that mentioned a while ago about what they're doing. The young people create the ideas and how to implement them and where they go, and being able to work through that together and know exactly how to get to the outcomes. And so you establish that why together, and then you work together to seek the outcomes, or how we're going to address those issues that rise. So hopefully that helps, Marshall, but that's kind of the approach that I use is I really do look at the young people as the experts and realize that it's been a long time since I was a young person or in that age group, and so allowing them to be the informers and the ones to give the feedback is big. Anything to add to that, David?
To answer your question, Carol, I see that you ask, so presenting the data-driven issue, but then asking the youth how that affects them. I think there's cases where that may be the case, but I think, first off, I'm a big research person, and so to me, I think there's often an assumption sort of made of youth aren't interested in the research or youth aren't interested in some of the data. While that may be the case with some youth, again, depending on who the youth is and depending on where their interests lie, I also find that there may be youth who are very interested in the data, who want to understand some of the things going behind that. And so I think it's just as important to not only look at what the data says and how do we interpret this together, how do we look at this together and try to find out what's going on with the real issue, but also being able to go back and then saying, and looking at, well, what are the questions that you have about this data? What are the questions that you have about this issue? And then being able to problem solve together, being able to put out small surveys, whether that be something that's out in your community or something in your school, or whether that be even more higher level research even, and being able to find those answers together so that you're being able to go back to those tables, you're going back to those charts, you're being able to do those things together. And so, I think typically when we look at youth engagement, typically what youth engagement looks like on a national scale right now is doing something and coming up with ideas and being able to say, well, how do you like this? Can you support this? And a lot of the times it comes down to a yes or no question. Youth at that point can either be the yes person or they can be the no person. I think what we're working to try to do then is challenge that and say, but how do we go further into that and being able to say, not only is this okay, but what is this? And being able to develop those things, being able to create them as a whole and being able to go back to those things. So to answer the question, so presenting the data-driven issue, but then asking youth how that affects them. Right, and then being able to ask, so this data helps to explain this issue or it gives further information on this, but how do we take that further then? So it provided information on topic A, but what did it not answer that you want to know? What did it not discuss about how you want to help your peers or about your culture? And what did it seem to get wrong from your perspective? Because while we use data quite a bit to inform decisions, at the same time it may look different in our specific communities. And the question is, how do we connect something that was taken from a research to what's happening in our communities so that it's not just read, so we're not just discussing it, but so that it's really being able to be used to address those large questions. So again, going back to that why, again, it's always important, even with data, that we're being able to go back to those questions and say, if this is why we're doing it, then how does data inform that why? And how does the why inform the way that we collect data, the types of data that we collect?
Yeah, and Carol, I think that that's a great opportunity for when you ask, yes, kind of like the 5 whys, I'd say yes. But that's the place where you get to be real and authentic with young people, is saying, hey, from the adult or agency perspective, this is where we're coming from. We're seeing all of this information. We're seeing the numbers say X, Y, Z. What do you say? What are you seeing and what's happening with your peers? What do you see going on? Would you agree that there's an overrepresentation of young people that are in the system? How many of your friends are getting arrested? And so given that, putting it back on them and saying, hey, this is what information is, kind of what David was saying. This is what the information says, but what do you see? And what's happening? And so I think what we've seen is that it's amazing how oftentimes those two often come together, and they are similar. And so once the young people see that, and that's another way for us to see that we're on the same page, we then take it the next step and say, okay, so our data is the same. What do we do with it now? Okay, we see what the numbers are saying, we hear what you're saying, so how do we work together as a team to figure out what the solutions are? Mm-hmm. And so you put it back in there and saying, hey, that gives them a chance to see you're caring. It's not just numbers, but it is, we really care about what's going on and what's happening, and how do we create a solution? And if we don't have the people, the manpower, the abilities to do that, who are our partners that we need to bring to the table? And so it is a group discussion, it is a partnership that happens, a collaboration that's happening, as opposed to just opinions or even just data for that point.
Just kind of jumping in some strategies and tips then. One of the things that's really important is looking at the assessment of the organization. So how ready is the organization to really try to engage young people? So some things to maybe consider then in that process are things such as, are there policies that allow for youth to be at the table? Are there policies that maybe don't allow for youth to be at the table, or would be a barrier for youth to be at the table? If they are at the table and policy allows for them to be at the table, then what is the why behind that? So if the whole idea behind the policy is, oh, well, we can meet that grant, or we can meet that funding requirement, or, oh, well, we can say it's really cool to get their idea, and every single time there's a question, we're going to turn to them and say, hey, what's your idea on this topic? Then ultimately we still have some sort of tokenism that still is there to a degree at least, because we're not really valuing that opinion of that youth and that lived experience as something that's equal. And therefore the idea of decision making being mutual really can't exist under that policy. And so the question is then, what kinds of policies do we have in place? Do we have other adults and other professionals in the organization who can support the youth in their ideas and in their decision making? If we do, then that's great. How do we include those people? If we don't, then the question becomes, well, what do we have to do to try to get those agency staff to that point that we can try to have that? And so it's great to jump in sometimes. It's great to think, oh yeah, we're going to have youth at the table and they're going to provide their voice, and everybody's going to ask their opinion all the time. And we can have them at the table and we can have them engaged. We can have them trying to do stuff, but if it's not authentic again, and if ultimately it still comes down to sort of this token voice of, oh, they're at the table, but that voice is either ignored or given a different level of respect and value than something that's mutual, then it really doesn't get to what we're trying to talk about when we're thinking of engagement and relationship as something that's authentic. So being able to look at those policies, being able to look at procedures, being able to look again at who is at the table, and being able to then work with youth and work with the adults to find out who is there that can partner with us. Again, being able to look at that teacher maybe who's in the school and saying, you know what, that teacher really wants to be able to see youth involved in what's going on and what's happening. And so, again, recognizing that why is always important with who partners with. Is it nice to have other people at the table who are doing some good work? Absolutely, but there may be times where those partners also aren't doing the same kind of work and don't have some of the same values and things that we may have at that point. And so, just as a partner may be very beneficial and may be able to support the ideas and the vision and the goals that we have, there may also be partners who it'd be nice to partner with what they're doing. They're doing some awesome work. But if it doesn't go back to that why they were doing, then why are we doing it?
So yeah, Carol, you raised a good question. Most of it are already assessed the readiness, but do you have an official test or survey that you would recommend? And so there's a couple things I would respond to that. One is I would be interested in hearing from the group how they did that, how they assessed the readiness. Was it just verbal communication, talking with people, going out and getting some connections, that kind of thing, and asking, do you have young people and what's going on? So I would definitely love to know that answer to that one. Yes, there are a few tools that are out there that I've even recently discovered. The one thing that you have to remember is some of them are geared to specific goals. So like there's Youth on Board actually have a tool, a readiness tool that's actually pretty good that you can utilize, and it does just look at how are you ready to engage young people. But then it talks a little bit, it moves toward them involvement in more of a governance or oversight board or something like that. And so their purpose, their why is more for developing young people to serve on a board. But some of the questions that are in there are really good. The youth engagement tool, and I suddenly completely went blank of the university. It's in the resource slide that's at the end. It's a pretty decent tool, but it's pretty extensive, and so being able to use that, I think we have the YET, so there we go. And I think that the YET is what is actually you guys are using through your evaluators at the A&M, I believe is what they're using. So it's a great tool as well. And then we are creating a tool here ourselves, and so there's a few out there, but they're not very many, and not very few that have much evidence behind them. And so being able to find something that has some evidence, that's evidence-based and has been practiced and piloted, there are very few on assessing that readiness. And I want to say one other thing about the assessment of the organization is a couple of things. And so if you are actually housed in an organization or looking to work with organizations, there are different approaches, but the need for the agency to be ready to support it, you kind of have to know what that might look like as you begin approaching an organization. And so when it comes to looking at their assessment, can they do that? It may be as simple as is there an individual within this agency that can be given some real substantial time to trying to recruit and engage young people? Do we have the infrastructure within our system to support the work we would like for them to do? Because it's really sad when you grab a group of young people, get them excited, ready to be a part of change, ready to be a part of development, and it's not sustained, or there's no one to support those efforts. And so that's part of that assessment. It may not be an official assessment, but just figuring out what the readiness is of the organization to support that. And do you have that buy-in from the executives or the leadership that would make those decisions? Real quick, Jeff says, we have not completed a readiness assessment yet, but plan to add a tool by Youth Infusion. Actually, Youth Infusion is part of the Youth on Board, and that's the tool that's included down in the notes to address these questions with organizations within our communities. I think can file share if you had the link. Yeah, so yeah, that's when actually Youth Infusion is a really good tool. That's part of that Youth on Board tool, Jeff. Yeah, you can email it to me, and I'll make sure it's the same thing that I have. That'd be great. Be great to see another tool. Okay, so building on those relationships, we hit that a little bit in talking about how do we make it happen. So these are just some ideas of how to reach out and how to maybe recruit some young people if you don't already currently have them or looking for more. One of those is I've used oftentimes is called doing a forum, just getting young people together. So where are they? And just gathering young people around a common purpose or a common goal and just getting around and doing a forum, and whether it's offering some food, having some open discussions, small group breakouts around topics. What are the issues? How do we address those issues? Those kind of things. Just get the feedback. And then once you get those young people together, seek buy-in from them. Hey, we see the issues. Would you like to be a part of the change? Okay, these are the issues that are going on with our young people in our community. Would you like to be, as a young person, be a part of to see the change happen within our community? So that's kind of how I would use forums. Existing youth groups, councils, organizations that are already going on in the community. So it may be a school council, it may be a city council, a junior city council group, 4-H, those kind of things. What's already going on where young people are already involved in your community, and can we become partners? Are there young people that maybe, if they're looking at your risk factors, do they have a passion or a desire to address those risk factors? And can we partner with those organizations to reach out? And even if they don't become official partners, but are there young people within those agencies that would be willing to be a part of that? And then just from that point, start a collaborative meeting and brainstorming about what can we do, what wouldn't we do, and specifically around your risk factors, what can we do to address those specifically? All right. Oh, that's around the tool. All right, so looking at strategies, more strategies to develop a sustainable plan. This one's big. So we talk about the why. We've mentioned that earlier about what would that why look like, why are we here, and why are we doing it. Being able to get that on the ground pretty early, but young people being a part of developing that. So it's not hey, our grant said we're going to involve young people, so go. But being able to let them be a part of that development, part of figuring out what is our desired outcomes and how are we going to get that. But even more, how do we sustain it? And so if it's a one-time effort and they're just an event, that's one thing. But young people be involved on a continual basis. Looking at all of the risk factors that Carol sent to me that you guys are addressing, those aren't going to go away with one activity. And they're not going to go with one project. And so how do we look at our partnerships? How do we look at our agencies beyond our funding to support the efforts in engaging young people to address these issues? I will just tell you, just the years of being able to work, if you don't establish that pretty early on, it's really hard to come back on the other end and try to establish that. So you get the great work going and then try to figure out where the partnerships and funding are going to happen on the other end becomes difficult. So start early and determining where do we want to go, where do we want to see this happen, and how we sustain young people being a part of that. Do so. So establish that common vision, mission, the goals, the desires, all of that working together in partnership. And then ensure the buy-in from those decision-making entities. So who are the people that have the money and who are the ones that make the decision? If they are on board with you in the need and the desire to have young people be equal partners in this process, then make sure that you have buy-in from them so that it helps support the sustainability. And that's kind of where we come to the sustainability part and showing me the money. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we need money to make this happen sometimes, to be able to do events and be able to make things happen. And so being able to make sure that there is some kind of financial support behind it. CQI, which is continuous quality improvement. Who will make sure that you're doing what you wanted to do? We mentioned earlier is how will you know you're successful? That was part of those questions we put in earlier. And so what system do you put in place to know that as you hit milestones in your plan, how do you know that those things are effective, and how are you doing and making this as well? So just like you would do for any other grant, just like you would do for any other part of your process, you look at that with your youth engagement. How do we know that we have a plan to make sure young people are constantly there? One of the complaints we oftentimes hear is, well, it's hard to keep young people engaged because they move, they graduate, or they lose interest. And so what is your plan to address that? part of our plan was mentorship. How are they replacing themselves? Is someone that's very active, that's very verbal, outspoken, that's in your group, that's kind of your champion. Does that champion, are they mentoring someone behind them so that when it is time for them to move on, there's someone to step in their place? And so have you developed that process within your system to make sure this continues happening? And then share your plan, so once the young people develop it and the adults work together to develop a plan, make sure people know about it. Make sure other people see what's going on, put it out there, let the young people own it, it's theirs. So let them tell their friends about it, their friends or families, their churches or whatever, that they are a part of this initiative, and you'll be amazed at who jumps on the board and wants to support it. And then again, ongoing training for all parties. There's consistent training on youth-adult partnerships and training on how do we engage young people, how do we engage adults, how do we keep this process going, and a continual moving process for us all. Anything to add on that?
Yeah, and again, just always making sure that all that always goes back to that logic model of, again, if we're doing it, why are we doing it? Making sure that funding always goes back to those mission plans of, if this is our goal, these are our objectives, this is the purpose of it, this is our why for it. Always making sure that everything we do always goes back to that. It's just always important because it leads to that sustainability. If we come across and we have something that's disorganized, it doesn't appear to have a common plan that is, oh, we have youth doing this and we have youth doing that, and it's kind of all over the place. That's nice, but we can go deeper than that at the same time.
So Jeff just sent out to Carol the Youth Infusion tool, and so when you see that, actually once you see that, you'll see that some of those questions, the things to consider, they match up pretty well with that, because that's where I got them from. And so it's a great tool. Carol also mentioned, do you recommend co-training with youth and adult presenting together? I think it depends on the audience. I think it depends on the topic, on whether or not the young person should be there. David and I are both huge components of youth not being tokens, and what that means, they just kind of that nice little seal that you have sitting next to you while you do all the talking in a presentation. And so I think that's, again, going back to the why. Why would we want a young person there? Is it just to tell a story, or is that story helping gain some momentum towards change? The other end of that, has that young person been trained to know how to do that? And so if I'm presenting with a young person and they're going to tell their story, which is great, but does that story help ignite some change within an organization or the people that are hearing that story, so that it's not just some exploitation of a young person that's there? And so I think it depends on the group. Obviously, if you're speaking to a group of young people, yes, a young person should be there and probably doing most of the talking as opposed to the adult. But then I go to the flip side. If I'm sitting in a board meeting, those board members are most likely going to be my peers, age-wise, professionally, those kind of things. And so there's a certain level of communication. There may be a young person that's in that process with me, but most of the talking, most of the communication might be myself, because those are my peers at that point. Why young people should be at the table and why they should be involved, that the young person's desire to be involved, that can come from that young person. And so I really think it needs to be determined what the purpose is in speaking to that group, and what are the abilities of that young person and that adult to effectively communicate to the audience. So, Carol, I hope that answers your question, but I think it depends on co-training. Just having one there because we could say we have a young person, I would say no. Agree with that?
Absolutely.
So, all right. Looks like we're moving slowly. Are we ready to move on?
Yeah, I think so.
There we go. All right, some practical strategies and tips to think about engaging them. So for the youth specifically, engaging, you got to be where youth are in order to engage them. And so being able to know where they hang out, what they do, that means you don't have to dress and act the way that they do, but where are they? And so if you are present, I think someone mentioned that, asked that question earlier, but if you're present amongst young people, they're going to begin to recognize you and notice you if you're consistently present. And so where they are, they're going to begin to develop a level of trust and may not ever even communicate with you verbally, but they're watching you. And so you've got to be there so that they can begin recognizing you and getting familiar with you, so that that trust level is built. For the young person, again, relate with meaning. And so if I want to engage you in a conversation, do it in a way that's meaningful to that young person, and also for yourself, but not just for the fact that, hey, I want to get information from you. Communicate that you care and that you really do value them as a person and as a young person. Huge follow through. If you're going to do something, or say you're going to do something, or you're going to get back to a young person about something, If you want them to be a part of something, I'm going to give you a phone call or an email, do it. Make sure that you follow through. If you're going to make a commitment, follow through that commitment. Or if you cannot, just be honest about it and say that you can't. But the follow through is huge. Be present kind of goes with be where they are. Or if you're in a meeting with young people, we oftentimes make fun of young people that say they were in a board meeting or doing something and they're in the back on their texting on their phone. Well, if you are that adult in the midst of a bunch of young people and you're the back room texting on your phone, they're probably talking about you the way we talk about them. And so be present. You know, when you're in the midst of them, be present and active with the young people. And being genuine about who you are. Again, you don't have to go and try to speak their language and try to their lingo. Just be yourself and be present in the moment. And again, being consistent with time, being consistent with your availability, and being honest about what you can and cannot do. Huge. Listen. I definitely can't stress that one enough. Is saying young people are going to speak. They're going to tell you their opinion. They may not be all the most tactful sometimes in telling it, but they're going to tell you where they are and what's going on, and it may not be direct. And so always listening, always being available. I remember one time someone asking me, how do I so effectively help engage young people at the time when we were doing some work? And I said, it's because I just listen. And the person said, that's it? Actually, it was at a conference. And that's all you do? I said, yeah, I listen. A young person speak. I listen to what they have to say, and then we work together to figure it out. It really can be that simple. Listen to what they have to say and be amazed of how you are able to engage them into the process, and just to get to know a young person. And then the other one is challenge them. I mean, really challenge them on growth, on how to be engaged, to learning new things. Just because they're a young person doesn't mean that they're necessarily incapable of being involved in a board, or being able to go and speak at a conference, or those kind of things. Really put things before them that challenge them to grow and to develop their leadership abilities that they may not ever know that they had otherwise. And then encourage them constantly. Looking at some of the risk factors, the populations that you guys have listed and you're going to be working with, being able to encourage them that they can overcome or they can work through those things, and that you're there and available for them becomes really, really big. That they have an out, they have an opportunity for something else, becomes a huge encouragement to them that you may not find out up until later in life. So on the adult side, some of the practical things, education. I think this one's big for us as adults because it's simply being able to know how do I do it, and being humble enough to say, I really don't know what to do. I really don't know where youth are. I don't know what they're dealing with. Or even to the other extreme, social media. I don't know where young people are, so say that. You know, I don't know what social media mediums they use, that kind of thing. Just continually educating yourself about what's happening with youth culture. And you know what? Let them be the ones to educate you about what's happening. I can tell you now, David and some of the other young people that I work with, I constantly go to them because I'm like, I don't know what kick is. I don't know what this is. What do I do with this? You know, and I'm just honest about it. And one, they'll probably laugh at me. Why do you want to get on that, Mr. Cox? Because I want to know what's going on. Or they will tell me, no, Mr. Cox, you don't want to be on that side. And so just being able to have that engagement, constantly educating yourself on what young people, where they are and what they're doing. Release of biases, man. Knowing where young people may bounce up against our own biases and our barriers, the things that are barriers in our own lives. Being honest about that, and being real about it, and knowing that there are going to be times you're going to encounter young people that think, do, and believe differently than yourself. And so what are you going to do with that? When you're in a meeting and you have a young person that comes in that's completely different than what you've ever known, what are you going to do with that? You've got to definitely let go of those. Relate with purpose, I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. What you can or cannot provide, again, another self-explanatory one. Provide opportunities for them to be involved. Allow yourself to be challenged. And I think all of you probably could attest that just working with young people and getting to be a part of their lives can definitely be encouraging. But make sure that there is always an openness for yourself to be encouraged by those young people and their extreme resilience through where they've been and what's going on in their own specific lives. So anything to add to those, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, so the release of bias, I think, really just goes back to if my opinion and if my viewpoint of youth is automatically, oh, well, they're egotistical, they have their own ideas, they know what they want, but they're ignorant and they don't know how real life works. If that's my kind of opinion and that's my perspective, and I can't own that bias and I can't try to work towards changing that bias, then automatically what ends up happening is the question becomes, well, why do I want to work with that then? We talk about mental models quite a bit here. And how do you change that? Because the way you think determines the way that you act around youth as well. And that is, you know, it's not just something that is mental. It's not just something that ends up being how you perceive something, but it ends up coming into your practice as well. And youth are youth are perceptive. They pick that up, and it comes out into your practice. And suddenly, if that's the perception that, oh well, Mr. Cox doesn't think that I know what I'm talking about, and he doesn't want me to work with him, then I probably don't want to work with him, Michael either, because that's just the perception that ends up existing. And being where they are, again, really means being able to recognize, you know what, sometimes what may be my job, or what may be my agenda, or what may be my passion and my desire for things may not always match up with where their time commitment is, where their interests are, and that's okay. It's being able to meet them where they are, being able to find out what can be done, where can I, you know, if that's okay if you can't work on a project that I'm working on at the moment. But where can I support you otherwise? Where can I meet you where you are in those interests? And how can I support you in those interests so that at the same time you're still finding that support? So that, being consistent doesn't mean let me be consistent when it's convenient. Let me go on and be consistent and be on time and be present when it's convenient for me or when that matches up with my schedule and my time. But it means being able to, again, meet where you are at that point in your life and with what's going on in your life at that time. And when it comes around, when maybe I do have more flexibility, maybe I have gained some additional skills, and maybe things in life are going a little bit easier at that time, I'm wanting to remember that, and I'm wanting to be able to go back, and I'm wanting to say, you know what, he was around when that happened. He was around when this was going on in my life. And as a result, you know what, I learned a lot from that. Let me try to bring those skills back in to the group with where they're at. Let me join in on what's happening and whatever projects they may be working on. And suddenly, not only have I gained some additional skills I can contribute, but suddenly we have that relationship again that's being built and continued on as a result.
Thanks, David.
Yes.
I get to smile over here is, many of you don't know, but David has been working with me. I've been working with David since he was a youth in college, and so it's really cool to be able to do a presentation with him to see where he is at this point. I don't take any credit for it. He's just an awesome person, but so it's kind of fun to kind of see that, but being able to know that that can happen. All right, so let's look at our last polling question. Do you know what young people are saying about youth and adult partnerships within your community? So kind of going back to the why. What are young people saying? Is this important? Should we do it? Is it not necessary? Adults don't care about what we have to say. What are young people saying? Do you know what they are saying? It's a little bit of a split. Okay, 57 yes, 42 no. Oh, never mind.
And I guess I'd be curious too, if you do know, what was the way that you found some of that information out? Was that through a survey, or was that through maybe a forum like Michael mentioned, or what was the way that you found out what youth were learning about youth-adult partnerships and what they were saying about those partnerships?
All right, so we got about exactly 50-50 split. Thanks, Glenn. So through the youth we're Clear Creek, through the youth we're working with and their peers who really want to be a part of the partnership. Cool. So Clear Creek is an obvious example of, if you just ask them, you find out, and you know. Yeah. I'll give it a few seconds, let these guys finish typing it up. As they're typing and we're looking at that, go ahead. We're moving on to our last portion of this. Is going to be some question and answers, and just another chance for us to kind of wrap things up, and hopefully maybe we've spurred or ignited some questions within you, and at least got your brains thinking if there's some areas. But if there's some things specifically that you are currently struggling through, some barriers of reach that we may want some feedback on, or just some things to share, this is going to be that time to do that. So Sasha says, we have really strong and active alumni network where youth mentor and take on leadership roles and express how important the partnerships are. It's good. So Sasha, I would definitely want to know, is that information shared just with the young people that are involved, or does that go back to maybe agencies, the other adults, those kind of things, so that they can kind of have buy-in on that as well? right, Jeff asked specifically, said particularly, partially through the work with the THAI program, but I am also a youth minister and get to engage with youth on a pretty regular basis. They keep me apprised of what's going on, even if I don't want to know. Yeah, I know that goes. You hear it all, but it's great feedback and information. Excellent trust and relationships obviously built. Okay, by Marshall. Yeah, Sasha says it's both. They actually help write curriculum and lead wilderness camps trips. Nice. It's good. So definitely being able to see how to engage those and how do you maintain and sustain those becomes a big deal. And a lot of that depends on the why again. So what is it that we want to happen? Why do we want it to happen? And what are we doing to make it make sure that it's going to continue? Hearing some of those successes, peers hearing those as well as adults hearing those is really beneficial to all, so that you can make sure that it's something that carries on and continues. It's a hot topic of conversation this week, actually. Who did that come from? Yeah, can't tell who's on that. The hot topic, I'm guessing that a hot topic is at your, maybe your Yak meeting or something. All right. I'm okay with us finishing early if we ended up doing so, but this is that chance for any questions, any statements or anything that you would have. We definitely are going to open up the lines for that. You can definitely type those in or push *7 to unmute your line, and you can ask verbally as well. Cool. Thanks, Clear Creek.
Michael, this
Yes.
is Carol.
Hey, Carol.
Just a real quick piece of this. If I have sites that are struggling with a very specific issue, in some cases it can be the risk factor that they're addressing. In some cases it can be the adult participation piece of it. Instead of bugging you over and over again, which is probably what's going to happen, I don't know exactly how to help them and support them, because I want to make sure that I'm providing the resources necessary that they need to do that without draining everybody's energy.
So the first question is, do you guys have like a regular, like a monthly call, or with all the grantees, do y'all have a consistent time where everybody's kind of at the same, or at least in the same space, whether it's online?
We do, but it's probably quarterly, so it's not, and one of the things we thought of was kind of presenting webinars to help bring folks together around topics that we all have to deal with and some are struggling with. So
yeah, I think one is we're definitely available, and you wouldn't completely exhaust me because I have a team of folks that I would punt to if necessary, or definitely bring along with me and have that conversation. But I think also it's some way to gather that information. So if you can see if there's there's some consistent themes or consistent things that are being reported that people are having problems with, then maybe we could again maybe do another webinar or something that you kind of hit that topic on a grander scale. But we're definitely not opposed to helping you out wherever we can, or helping you find some of those resources to address some of those specific issues that people may bring up.
I appreciate that.
Dottie said, thank you, Dottie. Do you have any advice for, is it evaluate, I'm guessing? Youth engagement strategies across the THI sites. That might be a question I would say maybe even goes back to Carol, because I know that you guys have a partnership with Texas A&M, and they're doing the evaluation for the grant. And Carol, definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's part of their initial thought was to use the YET.
Yeah, Dottie is A&M.
That's pretty funny.
So she was doing that whole stealth thing on you, I think. I'm not exactly sure. So when you said go back to A&M, I will ask Dottie that question.
Well, Dottie, sounds like we need to talk. We've got something in the works over here that we would hope to roll out this summer that may help with some youth engagement, and so maybe we just need to talk and see if there's some ways we can partner on that. No problem. Carol has my contact information, so we definitely would love to be able to share as that thing rolls out. It'll be hopefully ready to go by the 1st of June. We'll see. Any more questions out there, comments from you guys? Thank you guys for allowing us to be a part of your work. Thank you, Marshall. All right, so this it will be recorded, and we will send the link to Carol so that Carol can get that out to you guys, and it will probably be hosted on our website. And so we look forward to working with you more and partnering with you as this initiative keeps going, and look forward to the work you guys are doing with young people. So on our end, thank you very much for letting us have the time with you, and hopefully the information was helpful